you look at some of these cities like, say, San Francisco, LA, other places where, for example, there's these open air drug markets, right? That's one way to describe the scene. There's this radical libertarianism that's promoted where you say, well, this person who's addicted to this drug, we can't impose ourselves on them and prevent them from taking this somehow, because for some reason that would be imposing on their rights, but it's perfectly fine for them to kill themselves with the drug. It's weird. It's like our priorities have become inverted, or we lost that guiding principle that you're outlining here.
Yeah, it's very interesting because this problem that I am discussing isn't just relegated to like legislatures and statutes and like the boring stuff. This is evident in our culture. It's evident actually in the back and forth that I've been having with Andrew Tate for the past few weeks. I mean, Andrew Tate obviously is this mascu-bro influencer. He was the most Googled man in the world a year ago. He tells young men that they are under attack by our society. He accurately actually diagnoses this cultural ill that our society vilifies men. And then he prescribes as the antidote materialism and pornography and exploitation of women and worship of self, this very self-destructive prescription for a problem that he accurately diagnoses. And this is perfectly emblematic of what has happened in our political cultural environment. It's fairly easy to look at something that's wrong and identify it as wrong. But what's not as easy is to define what's right. It's easy to point out what's wrong, but it's not easy to define what's right. And so what happens in our culture and what has happened culturally and politically is exactly what has happened with Andrew Tate, where you have someone who, to his credit, is courageous enough to point out a bad thing that's happening in culture, even when that is unpopular to point out. And it resonates with a lot of people who are the victims, who are being victimized by this assault, in this case on their masculinity. But then because we as a culture and as a political body, as a nation, have surrendered the idea that objective truth exists, that natural law must reign if we want society to be well ordered, we fall prey to a false diagnosis. We fall prey actually to a self-destructive diagnosis as a solution to the problem, even if the problem was correctly identified. And this has happened in politics too. It's really libertarianism, because libertarianism doesn't want to define what's right. They want that to be a morally relativistic individual truth. They want everyone to have the license to make those decisions about morality themselves, even when it impacts the larger society. And that is not conservatism. The Republican Party has embraced libertarianism as conservatism, but it's not. In fact, the framers of our Constitution rejected libertarianism because that's essentially what the Articles of Confederation were. The Articles of Confederation were a libertarian document. It didn't work. It created chaos for the first years of our country. So the Constitutional Convention was convened and they came up with a document that was not libertarian, a document that understood the necessity of a moral order in society and gave government the just authority to recognize objective reality, to recognize natural law. When I say it's not a new idea, it's not even a new practice. We have laws in our nation right now, for example, where children are not allowed to even walk across the floor of a casino. Why is that? It's not because they're going to be physically harmed walking across the floor of a casino, walking through slot machines. It's because we as a society acknowledge that that's immoral. It's morally harmful for a child, not physically harmful, morally harmful. And that's just one example of many. We have laws that govern morality, even if it doesn't dictate religious practice. And the left would like us to believe that those two things are the same thing, and those two things are not the same thing. The people at home, entrusted as the protectors, meaning our elected officials, they willingly surrendered the definition of words. Again, I know it's incredibly unpopular, even among Republicans, to talk about gay marriage, but gay marriage was the beginning of the redefinition of words that Republicans allowed. There was no limiting principle on it at the time, and we're seeing the repercussions of that. It's an incredibly important battle that Republicans simply surrendered because they were like, oh, I don't care what you do in your own home. I don't want to define for someone what happiness might mean. Who am I to boss someone around? Separation of church and state, blah, blah, blah. And they didn't They willingly surrendered this definition, not realizing the power that it would give to the other side. And we're suffering from it today.
Wasn't thinking about any of these, I guess, implications at the time.
The people at the time who spoke out against the efforts to legalize gay marriage, who warned about the repercussions, were accused of engaging in slippery slope fallacies. They were called Bible thumpers. They were, castigated as the religious right. Things that a lot of conservatives didn't want to be associated with those names. And so they backed off. But it's hard. I think we're such a prosperous society. We have enjoyed such immense freedom and wealth and opportunity, just this amazing life that we have in the United States of America, that we forget, or it's not tangible, we can't feel it, that there are people who want to take it away from us, who have the ability to take it away from us. And that if we don't constantly fight back against it, not just kind of defensively holding it at bay, but if we don't hold down the fort, then someone else is going to occupy it.
You're bringing up the politics. People call it the politics of personal destruction. Another sort of way to talk about it is heckler's veto. Yep. This has been such an incredibly powerful tool of this kind of authoritarian left, right? It
is. Yeah, the heckler's veto is, I'm going to intimidate you into silence, even if the law doesn't require it. I'm going to socially coerce you into compliance, essentially. I mean, we've seen this everywhere from on college campuses. When I went to speak at James Madison University this past April, and there were 1,000 radical trans activists. The speech was literally titled "The Ideology of Transgenderism," and I was talking about, where did this idea of the gender spectrum come from? Where did the idea that if you identify as a woman, you can be a woman, where did this come from? And of course, the answer to that is queer theory. It's a critical theory that begot of the Frankfurt School. And I was talking about the intellectual roots of this, and the debate team so objected to hearing a discussion on this that they condemned my appearance at this school. Now, I'm pretty used to being protested. I've been in this work for a long time. I understand it, and I understand how to respond. But they were hoping to intimidate me away from being able to speak. They were hoping that threats of violence against me and my family and against the facility and the students that were hosting would cause my viewpoints not to be discussed. And I'm saying this because I care so much about our children and our families and our country and these cultural institutions, but we've become so worried about uncomfortable conversations that even on the personal level, let alone the governmental level or the cultural level, we bow to the heckler's veto quite often, and it empowers them.
You kind of have this impression that a much larger group than just the people that are very, very loud, you have this impression that it's a much larger group that's sort of agreeing to that position, so you back down.
Yeah, and I talk about this a little bit in one of the chapters of my book about technocracy. Technocracy is rule by the experts, right? A lot of us became more familiar with this during COVID, when it was like, oh, all hail King Fauci. Listen to what he says. He is the predominant expert. Therefore, we are not allowed to question or dissent or have opinions that differ from his. He's a perfect example of technocracy, although he's far from the only example. It's not an isolated individual here or there that makes up the technocratic class. This is an idea. And I was researching this for my book, and what I found is the idea of technocracy goes all the way back to French socialists or this Russian Bolshevik scientist physician who accurately described technocracy, rule by the experts, which is kind of the heckler's veto, right? Like, if we make enough noise, you're not allowed to dissent. He described it as a stepping stone. Technocracy is a stepping stone from capitalism to communism. Because once individuals who maybe aren't in positions of elected power are unable to dissent, unable to question, then they have sacrificed their ability to identify objective truth, and they've surrendered that power to redefine words to someone arbitrary who's claiming to be an expert. So I find the heckler's veto to be much more than just a nuisance, much more than just an individual threat to a speaking engagement that I have on a college campus. I find it to be an outgrowth of the idea of technocracy, that if someone has designated themselves as an expert, no one else is allowed to question it. Otherwise, you will be branded as anti-science or transphobic or whatever the insult of the day is. And technocracy is prevalent in so many aspects of our lives. I mean, the entire administrative state in the federal government, all of those executive agencies, that is technocracy codified. That is the living embodiment of technocracy. We see it in educational institutions. We see it in the medical field, especially. Young parents will recognize it because we experience technocracy in the pediatrician's office. You go in and the pediatrician tells you, don't co-sleep and breastfeed only a certain amount and do this schedule of vaccines, and a parent with any questions is shut down immediately as if it's not their child and told just to defer to the experts, just to defer to what the American Academy of Pediatrics says or the CDC says. It is not always based on empirical evidence. It's based on ideology.
Well, you got me thinking about this term heckler's veto right now, because, traditionally the idea was just some random people come along, scream a lot, you can't be heard. So effectively they get the veto on, which direction things go. But here, this is something like it becomes experts' veto, right? Or it becomes the system's veto or the technocrats' veto or something like that.
The way you describe it as, someone shouting someone else down, it's a tool of the technocrats. It's how technocracy enforces the experts being the only ones allowed to have an opinion. Because it's not that Dr. Fauci is going to be out there actively censoring everyone who dissents, but his minions, the heckler's veto, the social pressure, the coercion, that's what shuts down people from maybe not legally being allowed to have an opinion, but from socially feeling that they can. I mean, we overlook the power of this tool. It's a power. I mean, we saw the example of this during COVID when the vaccines were rolled out, and we saw so many people who didn't want it get it anyway. They thought maybe the vaccine had been rolled out too fast. They weren't sure about the mRNA technology. They saw, maybe they were young men, they saw the risk profile for the heart problems, and yet they got it anyway. It was, sad, yes, but fascinating to watch this aspect of human nature, because you have to ask, well, why? Everything about what you thought, your analysis of the situation was accurate, and yet you did it anyway. Why did you do it anyway? And the reason for that is this social pressure. It's overwhelming. People don't trust themselves. People are made to be part of a community. We are not made to be hyper-individualistic. We're made to be part of a community that shares our values in order to help hold us accountable, but also in order for there to be cohesion amongst our people. There has to be a set of shared values. Otherwise, you have people, in this case it was abused, this social coercion. You have people who didn't want to do something, who were socially pressured to do something on behalf of the technocrats. For a lot of us, it was disillusioning to watch this unfold or to see the grip that technocracy has in our country. But for me, I spent the last year writing this book, and I will tell you that unpacking exactly how all of this happened, how it came to be, why it has such a strong grip on our nation now, has actually encouraged me that once we understand this reality and acknowledge it, we will be able to fight back against it, but not just through platitudes and trite cliches, through a difficult and challenging reorientation of how the Republican Party operates and how we define what we want for our society.
So, hide your children. I'm going to go back to your title here. It doesn't seem somehow proactive, right? Or is it?
It's twofold. First of all, I got this idea from, remember that YouTube video that went viral a couple of years ago, the guy Antoine Dodson? It was a local news report that just everyone in the country saw this hilarious YouTube video where the guy was like, you gotta hide your kids, hide your wife, because they'd gotten attacked or something.
Obviously, we have a rapist in Lincoln Park. He's climbing in your windows. He's snatching your people up, trying to rape them. So y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife, and hide your husband, because they're raping everybody out here.
And I thought that was so funny, and it was such an apropos, not funny, but a way to bring levity to a very serious topic. But the way that I describe this in my book is we must, as parents, give shelter to our children. The idea of sheltering your children has been castigated in our nation. Oh, you don't want your kids to be sheltered. They won't have an idea of how to operate in the world. They'll be unsocialized, blah, blah, blah. but giving shelter to your children from the evil of the world until they are equipped to handle it, until they understand the definition of right and wrong for themselves, so that when they look at the world and they encounter evil, they can identify it as such, and not just identify it, but understand what right is compared to evil. We must, as parents, give our children shelter from this evil so that they don't grow up confused at best, or at worst, indoctrinated. And then once they are capable of this discernment, then we will have formed them into self-sufficient members of our society, hopefully as spiritual individuals with an active faith, as capable adults who are equipped to handle not only families of their own, but capable of guiding our country on to the next generation. So I think it is proactive. Yes, I know it's a little tongue-in-cheek because it's attempting to bring levity to a tough topic, but we've gotten away from protecting the innocence of children. Maybe it's because of cell phones, maybe it's because of our culture so inundated with, and has been for so long, with overtly sexual advertisements. And now, you know, children are exposed to critical race theory and trans theory and drag queen story hours and neo-pronouns, all of the rest of it. We've forgotten to protect children's innocence. And that's a key part of the Marxist strategy to destroy our country, is to subvert the innocence of our sons and daughters. And we should hide our children from the Marxists as we eradicate Marxism from the institutional structures of our country.
Liz, so as we finish up this fascinating conversation for me here, I guess I'm finding myself wondering, there's still this whole significant group of people in society who I don't think are on board with radical Marxist changes, but they're kind of maybe a bit on autopilot. Maybe they don't really see what's happening. Maybe they realize they've heard this, they feel that something's wrong, they can't put their finger on it. It's those people that probably, in a sense, are the most important people in the equation. I'm just curious if you agree with that.
Yes, I think we're at a very unique moment in our nation, because a lot of the people you described, which I would describe as just average moms and dads, they're maybe not super politically engaged because they're busy and they're raising families, have unintentionally become more politically aware as their children and their families have come under attack by this wokeness. They don't like it, and they recognize in their gut, the way that I did when that journalist at CPAC asked me if I thought that we should legalize meth. They recognize inherently that it's wrong, that critical race theory is wrong, trans ideology is wrong, wokeness is wrong. They recognize that it's wrong, and they're looking for the leadership or the solution, the antidote, the prescription to fix this, so that they can just go back to their regular lives, just go back to being moms and dads and workers and living. And they're looking for that. And if we don't offer a clear vision, then they're going to, well, what happened with Andrew Tate? We're going to have situations like that where people fall prey to an accurate diagnosis and a dangerous prescription for the problem. So I think people's eyes, parents' eyes, have been opened to an extent that they are willing, in a way that they never have been before, to engage in political discussions and hear the reality of where this chaos, this insanity, this evil is coming from. And my hope, of course, and I know I'm biased here, but my hope, of course, is that they do choose to pick up this book, even if they're not particularly politically engaged. If you care about your children, you care about society, you care about what our country is, and your family's ability to thrive and to flourish in our society, then be part of this fight with us. Build the country that we want.
Well, Liz Wheeler, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for joining Liz Wheeler and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kellick. Hello, everyone. I think we all need a little positivity and inspiration in these turbulent times. And so I would like to introduce a new art store we've set up in partnership with the NTD International Figure Painting Competition. Its mission is pure truth, kindness, and beauty.
It's a painting that is peaceful. There's a lot of beauty in it. and you forget about whatever you might be worried about.
Both original paintings and reproductions of these beautiful works can be found online at the Inspired Original Shop.